man. Let's wrap this up. I've got to get to the watchtower.
Before Luthor throws something else at us.
Doomsday.
Should have been a combined assault.
Clark sometimes forgets he can't do everything himself.
Hello everyone, what you just saw is footage of Injustice Gods Among Us, the newest game released by the joint collaboration of NetherRealm Studios and DC Comics, and has been released for the PS3, Xbox 360 and Wii U. And it's a follow-up to the rather successful reboot of the Mortal Kombat series, released back in 2011, which in itself was a follow-up to Mortal Kombat vs DC Universe, released 2 years prior to that by Midway Studios, rest in peace. And it is interesting that the release of these games has gone in this order, in hindsight at least. It would have probably made more sense to start with Mortal Kombat than Injustice and see how things would have fared from there. Still, it is interesting that Midway had a glaringly obvious problem with Mortal Kombat vs DC Universe, in that they were trying to serve up two very different audiences with two very different IPs. And to be quite honest, it didn't really serve either audience. But fortunately, while Mortal Kombat was let loose to ramp up the violence and gore in a way that the series is traditionally known for, here, Injustice, with the help of DC Comics, has given NetherRealm the chance to really implement the characters of the DC Universe in a way that just wasn't possible in the Mortal Kombat DC Universe game. But from the actual perspective of the game and the gameplay, just how much of Injustice is like Mortal Kombat? Well, yes, it looks and feels a lot like Mortal Kombat, through use of the same engine and a similar fighting setup. There are changes though. Unlike in Mortal Kombat, and this goes for the entire Mortal Kombat series here, the characters here in Injustice don't have a singular universal feel about them, so you can't just hold down and do an uppercut and expect it to work. So what you have here are characters that actually handle differently. Nightwing handles like a zippy fucker, Superman acts like he's in a Dragon Ball Z game, and Solomon Grundy is pretty unplayable. Also, there is no button that is dedicated to blocking, so you'll have to get used to pressing back and down like you would in fighting games of previous years. But fear not, for that spare button does have its own use. Each character has a special ability to a certain degree. When pressing that button, they can do different things. Superman will charge and glow, and it temporarily raises his attack power. If you use Nightwing, he has like these two separate buttons, and if you press it, it turns it into a staff, and you can use that as a new weapon to use. Same with Wonder Woman, that will change from a lasso to a sword. To be quite honest, some of these feel a little bit more useless than others. Something that did come over from the reboot of Mortal Kombat, mechanically at least, is the two-step meter which was found at the bottom of the screen. And so the way that worked is, as you was going for a fight, that meter would charge up. And once you got past the first step, if you wanted to use that, you could hold down the right trigger with whatever attack that your character had, and it would do a more powerful version of that attack. Or you could wait and try and get your bar to go all the way to the end, and then you could hold down both the trigger buttons and you would do a special move. Now, in MK, you would perform what was called X-ray attacks, and these were just hilariously brutal in showing different ways of bits of the body being snapped and broken, and was just generally good fun. Now here, the attacks aren't quite as brutal and graphic, but they are equally as ludicrous. So for example, the Flash will punch someone and then run the entire surface of the earth to come back round and then uppercut this person in the face. Superman will uppercut someone into sort of the orbit of the earth and then smack them and they come back flying down, and it's just ridiculous. It's just completely bloody ridiculous. Although, as with most things of this nature and in this type of game, does get a little bit tedious after the first 2 or 3 times. There is also a wager event which can happen midway through a battle, but that's just a really poor excuse to implement a quick time event, and I ain't spending no more time talking about it. So what makes Injustice stand out then from Mortal Kombat and other fighting games as well is its level design, and specifically how you interact with it. Now each level has its own selection of furniture which you can use for the purposes of just causing complete mayhem and destruction. Thing is, each of the characters reacts differently to certain objects. So, for example, Deathstrike would place down some sort of explosive device, and the impending shrapnel will go into your opponent and cause the damage that way. While Superman he's frickin' Superman, so he just picks everything up and smashes people over the face with it. And it gives each of the characters their own unique characteristic and flair. It does leave the game feeling a little bit unbalanced though, because you'll have certain rooms or environments where you'll have rockets, pianos, chairs, televisions on one side of the room and nothing on the other side. So the person on this side has a bit of an unfair advantage while they're being bombarded with all of these bloody objects. There is also the ability to whack a player off the side of the stage, like you've seen in stuff like Dead or Alive, and this is jolly good fun. And I think this has really only been implemented as a way to give cameos to other DC characters. So you'll be in Arkham Asylum and you'll punch a person through the side of a room, and on the other side, you'll have like Killer Croc, the Riddler, Penguin, and Two-Face. And they'll start just bashing around like a ragdoll before throwing you out the other side. Or I think it's the Hall of Heroes room, or you're on the rooftop, and in the background you've got Gigantica and Atom Smasher, and they're just beating the piss out of each other. And you can whack your opponent off, and then they go flying off into the hand of Gigantica, and it starts using you as an object. And it shows a sort of kind of nice little attention to detail, and it also shows that NetherRealm were clearly having quite a lot of fun while making this. And while these, along the same lines as I said with the special attacks, can become quite tedious, they are a little bit more challenging to implement because the other person has to be at the side of the stage and you have to be able to hit the correct move to send them off. So there's at least, more of a reward and there's more of a challenge in doing it. And also it does a lot of damage as well, so good one for that NetherRealm. And, just overall, it gives Injustice this over-the-top vibe, which makes it stand out. And this goes through with just the levels themselves, because as, you got these two meta-human type creatures pummeling each other, the level around you is breaking down and you've got all sorts of stuff going on. Yeah, you got things exploding, you got trains lying in the background, and it's very cool to watch. So at startup, Injustice has 24 characters to start with, and all of your favourites are here: Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Stephen Amell, and a gay 70s Hitler from a parallel universe. Now look, I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of DC Comics, and to be honest, I'm not much of a comic book reader in general. I mean, I've got The Walking Dead, and I've got Batman, Arkham Asylum, and actually, to be fair, Batman Year One is really, really good. Silent Hill, Batman, Hush. I have some comic books, but I'm not really the person, if you're looking for an in-depth review of this game from just the perspective of the DC universe, this isn't the review for you. So coming into this game, I knew about a third of the characters pretty in-depth. Another third I'd heard of through different means and different forms of media, and then just Black Adam. I have no idea who that was. With this all said, I still don't think that excuses the utter convoluted mess that is the single player campaign. Now, I enjoyed the story of Mortal Kombat, and it was completely ridiculous, but it's Mortal Kombat and it's allowed to be. To a certain extent, Injustice is allowed to play by a few of those rules as well. And it was really cool that NetherRealm took this approach to fighting games in that the single player campaign played a lot different to most fighting games up until this point. Instead of just picking a character, having an intro, fighting 10 people and having a boss and having an outro and having the story gone through that way, which usually would just have like a whole bunch of non-canon scenarios and would confuse the player, and you'd have to look online to see what the actual frickin' story of the game was. Here, you would play through a bunch of characters with different scenes, and they'd be split into different chapters, and you'd fight about 4 or 5 fights, then go on to the next person, and the story would unfold that way. And it was also a way to force you to play with different characters as well, and I really liked that. Now, I'll be quite honest, I mean, if you want to call it a teleprompt, whatever, I have to read this next bit because the story of Injustice is wow. So, yeah, the story is, in an alternative universe, the Joker tricks Superman, who ends up killing Lois Lane, his unborn son, and most of Metropolis with a nuclear device. Superman loses his supermind and kills the Joker in a fit of rage. After this, he establishes a new world order and thus becomes the game's antagonist, and we have an all-out war between Superman's regime and Batman's insurgency. Batman figures out, in what I guess we could classify as our reality, Joker's plans didn't go through, and the status is still the quo. So he teleports a bunch of people through into the alternative reality, and this your head begins to hurt. You see what I mean here? It's the parallel universe thing. I really, really like Bioshock Infinite, but I've had enough frickin' parallel universes to last me the rest of this year. Thank you very much. I think it could just be as well that, as someone on the outside looking in at the DC universe, this game is probably not the best way to introduce me to a lot of these characters, because for a lot of it, and particularly just because of the way the story is laid out, because you have these parallel universes, you have alternate versions of each of these characters, and you've got a good version and a bad version. which is fine for, you know, people like Lex Luthor. I know he is the primary antagonist of Superman. Here he's the good guy and Superman is the bad guy. I can deal with that. But there are characters like Cyborg who, you know, he looks like a pretty fearsome character. I had no idea for most of the game whether he was a good guy or a bad guy. If nothing else, Injustice just reminds me why I'm not a fan of a lot of the characters of the DC Universe in general, because they just don't really come across as likeable or relatable.
Diana! Your army will stand down. They will not abet Superman's madness. You hold no sway here, Pretender. I am in command. You stain Amazon honor. We are to temper man's aggression, not enable it. After Metropolis, Superman showed me the truth. Man's aggression cannot be tempered, only quelled. Slaughter the innocent? As Zeus fooled Hippolyta, Superman beguiles you. Your world's Amazons must be weak-willed if you are their queen.
See, no one talks like that in real life, and it's also like why Batman has always been the most dull, unlikable character in his whole universe. And I would say I'm a pretty big Batman fan, but Batman is like the most boring entity of that universe. And I don't want to make this comparison, but I feel like I'm going to do it anyway, so fuck it. Just look at any of the Marvel films over the past 10 to 15 years or so, and alright, fair enough, Thor is a little bit Shakespeare in the Park, but that plays well against, you know, Iron Man and Robert Downey Jr.'s character of Tony Stark and his interpretation of him. It works. And yeah, fair enough, Loki also is along those same lines, but Tom Middleton's interpretation of Loki is so fucking hammed up to the nth degree that, you know, he makes the Avengers, as far as I'm concerned. He's the best thing about that film. And even past that, just look at the X-Men films, for example, past Halle Berry and her inability to act in that third film for some reason. But they all talk like real people. You know, they are people you can relate to in different ways because they're human. And yeah, fair enough, I get it that these are superheroes, these are meta-humans, they're, you know, above whatever, they're not normal. But they still look like humans, they still talk and sound like humans, so why can't they actually talk as the way humans actually do? I guess it just comes down to what you want from your superheroes these days. And, you know, I think a lot of that has to do with the likes of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, establishing superheroes and villains in a real-world type environment. And with other comic book franchises following suit, I guess it all just comes down to what your preference is. In the end, I just find the verbiage of the likes of Wonder Woman and Aquaman to be a bit overblown and pompous. With that said, Green Arrow and his Downey Jr. Tony Stark-esque shtick I found to be quite entertaining. I don't know if that's what his character is supposed to be like, but fuck, I found something about this game that I could enjoy at least. Moving on from that side of the characters, the actual way that they fight. Again, there are a few balancing issues here as well, like there was in the level design. For example, Deathstrike is a very projectile-heavy type character who I can just see pissing most people off because he would be abused to hell. Superman as well is overpowered. I mean, he's frickin' Superman, but he's the only character that can use pretty much any objects in the game to just launch to his heart's content. While a lot of the other characters with certain objects, all they can do is jump and bounce off of them. And it does make things feel a little bit unbalanced. Still, if you're coming into this and you're looking for a tactical 2D fighting game, with the likes of Street Fighter and Marvel vs. Capcom, then you're an idiot. If you're a fan of Mortal Kombat, then you probably will enjoy Injustice. If you're a fan of the DC Universe, from my limited expertise on the universe, I'd probably say there's a good amount of fan service here done. The voice acting is very strong, and the way the characters interact with each other seems like what would be the equivalent of seen in the comic books. So you'll probably enjoy that as well. If you've got about 40 quid spare, I'd probably say avoid it. I mean, the campaign is only about 5 to 6 hours long on medium, and like Mortal Kombat, I remember taking at least 10 hours or so, maybe a little bit longer. And to be honest, past that, it's a lot of the same stuff that you'll find in other fighting games at the moment. And yeah, it doesn't add anything new past that. But what is on offer here is quite enjoyable, and if you've got a few friends round, it will see you over the weekend if nothing else. But yeah, if you're a serious fan of fighting games, you probably already know that this is not the game for you. And if you like, Super Smash Bros, you're probably not watching this video because you're too busy playing Super Smash Bros. So overall, Injustice Gods Among Us gets a 7.5 out of 10. A solid, enjoyable romp, but its longevity won't hold out past a week or so. Also, seriously, why the fuck does Lex Luthor look like Bruce Willis?